This is Professor Alex Edmonds of London Business School, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to the Grow the Pie Forum. And I'd also like to extend my sincere thanks to Human Value for publishing the Japanese translation of my book, Grow the Pie, How Great Companies Deliver Both Purpose and Profit. I'm delighted that the book is now available to a Japanese audience. So a good place to start is to explain, well, why did I write the book and why did I call it Grow the Pie? Well, the pie is the value that a company creates. And that pie can be given either to shareholders in the form of profit or to stakeholders in the form of fair taxes, fair wages, or fair prices. Now, most people have what I call the pie splitting mentality. This views the pie as fixed, and therefore any slice that you give to one party is necessarily at the expense of the other party. Therefore, shareholders and stakeholders are in conflict. Now, this pie-splitting mindset is practiced by many business leaders. They view the best way to increase profits as taking pie away from society. So they might increase prices to customers, they might lower their wages, and they might pollute the environment without any consideration of the social consequences. Or maybe just as bad is that you might have companies that pretend to serve society by releasing some nice sounding purpose statement, but they never actually put it into practice. Why? Because at their heart is the idea of a fixed pie. So if they did indeed put it into practice and serve society, they think this will be at the expense of profit. So we saw 4 years ago in the United States, 200 CEOs signed the Business Roundtable statement claiming they're going to serve society. But then many of them haven't put it into practice. Why? Because deep down, they think it's going to be at the expense of profits. But it's important to note that other people on the other side also practice the pie splitting mentality. So people who stand up for society, let's say trade unions or people who protect the environment, they think that the only way to protect society is to take from shareholders, is to reduce profits. And how do they do that? They might call for heavy regulation of businesses. But this may not work either. Why? Because profits play a key role in society. Profits go to shareholders, who might be parents saving for their children's education, pension funds investing for retirement, and insurance companies funding future claims. So any repurposing of business needs to take both shareholders and stakeholders seriously. It's not either or, it's both and. And so this is what my book is about. It's about a radically new way to think about business, which is to think about the pie being something which is not fixed. This is what I call the pie growing mentality. That is the idea that shareholders and stakeholders are not in conflict. When a company invests in its stakeholders, it's not just being charitable, it's not just giving the pie to other people, it's growing the pie, increasing the amount of value that's created, and that ultimately comes back and also improves profits to shareholders. Now, this idea of win-wins, where everybody benefits, that might seem too good to be true. So the heartbeat of the book is rigorous, large-scale academic evidence. And so this is why I'm delighted as a finance professor to be writing this book. Because often you might have books which are based on one single anecdote where people tell stories based on one company. But just learning from one company doesn't help you, because how do you know that people didn't handpick that one company because it happened to work? So my day job as a finance professor is to look at hundreds of companies over dozens of industries and across different countries in the world to see, does this hold up? And so let me just give you one example of one of the many studies in the book. This is one of my own papers, which I wrote a number of years ago. This looks at the effect of employee satisfaction. And what I found is that companies that go above and beyond in how they treat their employees, they beat their peers in terms of total shareholder return by 2.3 to 3.8% per year over a 28-year period, which is 89 to 184% compound. So simply put, if companies are treating their workers better, they're not just being charitable and giving pie to their workers at the expense of shareholders. They're growing the pie because workers become more productive, more motivated, and more likely to stay, ultimately benefiting shareholders. And importantly, the 28-year period that I studied included the financial crisis. It included September the 11th. It included the collapse of the internet bubble. So this suggests that growing the pie is just as important in bad times as in good times. It's not just a luxury for when the times are good. Now you might think, well, if indeed treating your employees well leads to higher profits, then do you need a pie growing mentality to do that? Shouldn't any company want to treat their workers well because they know they will make money? Just like even if you were a car company and you did not care about the environment, you would still invest in electric cars because there's money to be made. So if you were to play devil's advocate against my arguments, you might think you don't need a sense of purpose. All you need to do is to do a good spreadsheet calculation, and that spreadsheet will tell you there's money to be made out of treating your workers well, because they'll be more productive, and there's money to be made out of investing in electric cars because that's where there's demand. But one of the things I stress throughout my book is the limits of what we can achieve through spreadsheet calculations. And this is why I think purpose is so powerful. It allows companies to go above and beyond and make investments that they would have never done otherwise. Why? Because they just want to serve society. But the punchline is that even though these investments were motivated by serving society, they ultimately lead to profits down the line anyway. So let me give you an example. So back in 2007, the UK telecoms company Vodafone, they launched M-Pesa. This is a mobile money service that allowed people to transfer money from phone to phone without even having a bank account. And launching M-Pesa transformed people's lives. At the time, 15 million households had no access to banking, but this lifted 200,000 households out of poverty within the first 7 years by giving them access to funds. Now, the nice finale to the story was that Vodafone didn't just serve society, it was able to make money. Why? Because M-Pesa was able to charge a small sliver of every transaction as profits. Now, that's something they would have never been able to justify with a spreadsheet calculation. If you were a UK telecoms company, you would have thought the best way to make money is just to invest in the UK. That's where there's a wealthy population. That's where we have a core business. We should just develop our existing mobile phone services. But this sense of purpose, this allowed Vodafone to think of expanding into Kenya just because it wanted to help people who had no access to banking. And you can think about these examples in Japan as well. A sense of purpose, a sense of serving society can lead to companies making some seemingly crazy decisions that they might not have done otherwise. For example, it might lead you to collaborating with your biggest competitors. The telecoms company NTT, they cooperated with KDDI to pool their assets if a natural disaster occurs. Why? To ensure continued communication services in this disaster. It might lead companies to go above and beyond in serving the environment. As I mentioned earlier, many companies now are investing in electric cars, but Panasonic is developing cobalt-free batteries. Why? Because it wants to reduce the environmental impact of mining for this particular material. And even though that is something which is motivated by serving society, in the long term, this may well benefit Panasonic because there could well be regulation against mining cobalt. So why am I particularly delighted that human value is translating this book into Japanese? The book has been translated into lots of other languages, but I'm particularly excited about it now being in Japan because I think Japan has the conditions to really develop the pie growing mindset. But the most important condition is a long-term perspective. Why? Because yes, it's true that the pie can be grown, that shareholders and stakeholders can both benefit, but growing the pie does take a long time. But at the heartbeat of Japanese culture and Japanese business is this long-term mentality. So you have long-term orientated investors, such as the government pension investment fund. The relationships between workers and companies has always been characterized by long-term mindsets. But also, the Japanese economy and society does have challenges. And so what I hope my book can do is to inspire companies and society to go above and beyond and to address these challenges. For example, historically, Japan has had a dependence on fossil fuels. The idea of growing the pie, serving society, preserving the environment, that might inspire a transition to clean energy over and above the financial motivation. Historically, Japanese corporate governance has had good aspects, such as the code being introduced in 2015. However, there has been low board diversity and some other issues, highlighting that improving these governance practices is good business, not just good for society, will hopefully be added impetus. And finally, there have been in some sectors of Japan historically low returns to shareholders. And this idea of growing the pie, being energized by serving society, this can lead to companies being more innovative, more committed to excellence, being hungrier companies, and therefore ultimately benefiting shareholders. So often people think that a purposeful company is a fluffy, nice, sleepy company distracted from the bottom line. But no. It's a hungry, ruthless company, ruthless about creating value for society, but that same ruthlessness will lead to it creating shareholder value. So let me just leave you with one question to think about how to grow the pie in your organizations. And it's to ask yourself this question: what is in my hand? By this, I mean, what are the resources and what is the expertise that my company has, and how can I use these resources and this expertise to grow the pie to serve society if I just thought a little bit more creatively? So for Vodafone, what was in the hand was a telecoms technology which historically transferred text messages, and they thought, well, how can we use what's in our hand instead to develop mobile money? For NTT and KDDI, what is in our hand is communication services. We can use this to help countries recover from natural disasters if we were to pool with our rivals. With Panasonic, it is again technological expertise, and can this expertise allow us to develop a battery which does not use cobalt, even though people think that this is an essential input? So really, again, let me repeat my welcome to this Grow the Pie forum. It's great that Human Value is not only translating the book, but also launching a forum with leading executives and investors discussing how they're putting the idea of growing the pie into practice. And I really hope that my book will be a useful resource for you, regardless of whether you're an executive, an investor, a policymaker, a journalist, a business student, or even somebody outside business who's interested in learning about business. I hope that there's something in here for all of you. Thank you very much.